People love to call betrayal a lesson. They say it like it's clean. Like it doesn't rot under your ribs. Like it doesn't change the way you breathe in a room full of smiling faces. And when the betrayal comes from someone powerful, someone everyone depends on, you're not just asked to forgive. You're asked to be grateful. To swallow it quietly. To accept the loss as duty, as tradition, as survival. But what happens when your pain isn't just ignored? Is it rewritten? When the truth is inconvenient, and the story they tell about you is easier than the one you lived? That's when you learn the real purpose of forgiveness in pack politics. It isn't healing. It's obedience. I learned that lesson the night I was meant to be claimed. The keep was dressed like a holy place, stone arches, candlelight trembling on iron sconces, crimson drapes hiding every shadow that didn't belong. My hands were wrapped around a warm cup I couldn't taste from, because my throat had been tight for days. I told myself it was nerves. I told myself it was my sister's illness. I told myself I could endure one ceremony if it kept my people safe. Then I found Magnus. Not in the ceremonial hall. Not surrounded by elders and vows. In a side chamber lit low and private, his mouth at Lyra's throat, his hands on her waist as she'd always belonged there. And she wasn't hiding. She looked at me over his shoulder like I was late to my own execution. The cup slipped from my fingers. It shattered on the stone, sharp and final. Magnus turned, slow as a predator, and I understood something I should have known from the start. The first time he kissed me gently, it wasn't respectful. It was a restraint. By sunrise, I would learn why Seraphine wouldn't wake. By sunrise, I would understand the mating wasn't an alliance, it was a takeover. So I ran. I didn't understand yet that escaping an alpha doesn't end the claim. It only gives him a reason to make it personal. Subscribe now so you're here for every turn this story takes. I was never meant to lead, Seraphine was the alpha, the storm our pack rallied behind, and I was the one who belonged to the open sky. Even as children, it was obvious. Seraphine could walk into a training ring and make grown warriors straighten their backs like they'd been caught doing something shameful. She spoke and people listened, not because she demanded it, but because something in her voice reminded you that order was not a preference. It was a law. Me? I was the girl who climbed the watchtower just to feel the wind bully my hair loose. The one who disappeared into the pines and came back smelling like rain and feathers. I learned early that the sky is honest. It doesn't flatter you. It doesn't pretend you're safe. It simply tells you the truth in cold air and distance. If you fall, you fall. I was content with that. Our pack's territory sat where the forest met the cliffs, stone ribs rising toward the clouds, old ruins half swallowed by ivy, and a keep that had been rebuilt too many times to remember its original shape. We were not the largest pack, but we were proud. We guarded the mountain passes. We traded with the river clans. We survived winters that chewed weaker settlements into bones. Seraphine made sure of that. She took the mantle young, after our parents died on a border skirmish that wasn't supposed to happen. She didn't cry in public. She didn't falter. The elders watched her like hawks waiting for a weakness they could call immaturity, and she gave them none. When she stood on the keep's balcony and swore to protect us, even the most cynical among them bowed their heads. And because Seraphine was everything, strength, certainty, authority, there was never a moment anyone looked at me and thought, she will be next. I was relief. I was softness. I was the spare. Until the night Seraphine didn't come home from patrol. They carried her in before dawn, limp as if her bones had forgotten how to hold her up. I remember the way the torchlight made her skin look too pale, the way her hair clung to her forehead with sweat that smelled wrong, metallic, bitter, like something burned. The healers rushed her to the inner chambers. The elders prayed. The warriors stood in tight knots, whispering in anger. I tried to follow. An elder's hand caught my wrist, too firm for comfort, too familiar with control. She needs quiet, he said, but his eyes weren't on the door. They were on me. Measuring. Assessing. Recalculating a future I hadn't asked to be part of. Seraphine slept. At first we thought it was exhaustion, some poison from a blade, the kind of thing that passes with time. But the first day became 3. 3 became 7. The healers used herbs that had saved men mauled by bears and women bitten by vipers. Nothing. They tried spells that should have scorched corruption from the blood. Nothing. Her chest rose and fell. Her skin stayed warm. But her eyes did not open. It was like someone had taken the person she was and folded her away somewhere unreachable, leaving only the shell behind. The pack didn't panic immediately. Packs are stubborn that way. We convince ourselves we can outlast anything. That our pride is stronger than danger. But after 2 weeks, the edges of our territory began to feel hungry. Neighboring scouts lingered longer than they used to. Traders asked too many questions. Wolves don't always attack when you're weak. Sometimes they circle and wait for you to bleed out on your own. The elders called council. I sat in Seraphine's chair only because there was nowhere else. The great hall seemed to hold its breath, candle flames trembling in every draft like nervous animals. I could feel the eyes on me, the same eyes that had always slid past me to find Seraphine. Now they had no choice. They spoke in careful words about stability, alliances, safety. Their voices were smooth, but their fear leaked through anyway. They looked at our warriors and saw loyalty, and also doubt. They looked at me and saw the problem, a second-born skyshifter with no taste for politics. We need protection, Elder Marrow said. His beard was silver and his hands always smelled faintly of ink. A stronger alliance. A stronger alpha, someone else murmured, and though they didn't say it plainly, the meaning landed like a stone, not you. Then the doors opened. Magnus arrived with a soft echo of boots against stone and the kind of confidence that doesn't require volume. He was taller than most of our men, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark formal leathers that looked more like armor than ceremony. His hair was neatly tied back, and his gaze was the calm, unfriendly sort, like a blade laid on a table. He came with warriors lined behind him, their insignias glinting in the firelight. He smiled as if we'd invited him for wine. "My condolences," he said, and the words sounded practiced. Seraphine was formidable. I didn't like the pause before her name. I didn't like the way his eyes skimmed the hall and settled on me as if he'd already chosen what he would take. Elder Marrow rose. "Alpha Magnus," he greeted, relief and desperation braided together. "We weren't expecting." "You weren't expecting to be seen," Magnus corrected pleasantly. "Not in your current state." The air tightened. Warriors shifted. Hands drifted toward weapons. Magnus didn't flinch. He simply turned his attention back to me. "You're Avellini," he said. Not a question. A conclusion. I should have stood. I should have answered like Seraphine would have, sharp and unafraid. Instead my fingers found the edge of the table and held on. Yes, I managed. Good, he said, and there it was again, that sense of inevitability. Then we can speak plainly. Your pack is vulnerable. Your borders are a temptation. And your sister's condition invites opportunists. A murmur ran through the elders. I felt their panic swell like a tide. Magnus leaned slightly forward. I offer alliance. Protection. Reinforcement. And what do you want in return? I asked, because someone had to. His smile was very small. A mating bond. The words hit the hall and stayed there, heavy and ugly. I'm not, I began. Elder Marrow cut in quickly. Alpha Magnus is offering us mercy. Strength. Stability. Mercy. The word tasted like ash. Magnus' gaze didn't leave mine. You would remain within your keep. Your people would keep their homes. Your borders would be guarded by my warriors. No one would dare touch you. Touch you. The phrase wasn't meant kindly. And Seraphine? I asked. What happens when she wakes? Magnus' pause was barely a heartbeat, but I saw it. The calculation behind his eyes, the quiet impatience. When she wakes, he said smoothly, she'll find her pack safe. He didn't say in mine. The elders moved quickly after that. Faster than grief should allow. They spoke to me in private chambers with sympathetic faces and knives behind their words. This is duty, they said. This is sacrifice. This is the only way to keep the others from tearing us apart. I wanted to scream that Seraphine would never agree to be saved like this. That she would rather die with her pack free than live under another alpha's shadow. But Seraphine wasn't awake to argue. And I wasn't the storm people feared. So I did what the spare daughters always do. I tried to make myself useful. I agreed. They dressed it as choice, but the truth was written in every locked door and every guarded hallway. My consent had already been stamped, sealed, and placed on a council table before I ever spoke a word. The weeks leading to the ceremony blurred into a parade of rituals and rehearsals. Old women painted protective sigils on my wrists. Warriors bowed to me with strained faces, like they were bowing to a statue instead of a person. Magnus visited often, always accompanied, always careful to appear respectful. He brought gifts, fur-lined cloaks, polished metal, carved feathers from some distant artisan. He spoke softly about unity and peace and the dangers of isolation. And he touched me as if he was already entitled. The first time he kissed me, brief, controlled, I almost believed the pack was right. That perhaps he could be reasonable. But even then, his hand on the back of my neck wasn't tender. It was positioning. A reminder, I can move you where I want you. His second kiss lingered longer. His third came with a whisper at my ear that made my stomach knot. You'll be safe with me, he said. He meant, you will be contained by me. Still, I tried to endure it. I told myself that discomfort was a small price for peace. That fear could be swallowed. That I could live as a symbol if it kept my people from being slaughtered. That was the lie duty always tells, you can survive anything if you call it noble. Then I started noticing Lyra. She was always nearby, too nearby for a warrior who supposedly served Magnus' pack, not ours. She stood at the edge of halls with her arms folded, watching me like I was a meal being prepared. She offered training advice with smiles that didn't reach her eyes. She laughed at Magnus' jokes too quickly, like she knew them before he spoke them. Once, I caught her adjusting his collar. It was a simple gesture, intimate in its casualness. Magnus didn't stop her. When I asked one of Magnus' men who she was, he hesitated. A respected warrior, he said carefully. Close to the Alpha. Close. Another word that tasted wrong. The night before the ceremony, the keep transformed. Candles everywhere, soft music in the halls, crimson drapes hung like wounds. Everyone moved with forced cheer. They spoke of celebration as if Seraphine's sleeping body wasn't only a few corridors away. I couldn't breathe in it. So I did the stupid thing that betrayed girls do. I went looking for the man who was supposed to make it all mean something. I went to Magnus because some small part of me still wanted to believe this was survivable. That there was a version of tomorrow where I wasn't just a bargaining chip. I found him in a side chamber. Low light. Warm shadows. The scent of wine and something sharper. Lyra was there first, her hands on him, her mouth against his throat. Magnus' fingers were sunk into her waist like he was anchoring her to him. For a second, my mind refused to translate what my eyes were seeing. The world does that sometimes. It tries to protect you from the moment your life splits. Then Lyra lifted her head and looked straight at me. No shame. No fear. Just satisfaction. Magnus turned slowly, as if the interruption amused him. His expression wasn't guilty. It wasn't even surprised. It was annoyed. As if I had walked in at the wrong time on something he never intended to hide. My hands loosened around the cup I'd brought, some ridiculous offering, like warmth could fix betrayal, and it fell. The ceramic shattered on the stone, the sound too loud in the hush. Lyra's smile sharpened. Her palm slid over her abdomen in a gesture so deliberate it was almost ceremonial. She deserves to know, she murmured. The blood drained from my face. My throat closed. Magnus' gaze flicked to Lyra's belly and back to me. Still calm. Still controlled. Avellini, he said softly, like he was soothing a child. This is not what you think. I let out a sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't been so broken. Then tell me what it is. Lyra stepped forward. It's what it has always been, she said. An alpha takes what he needs. My nails dug into my palms. And I'm, what? Something you need? Magnus exhaled as if I was being unreasonable. You're necessary. Necessary. Not wanted. Not chosen. My eyes burned. And she's. His silence answered. Lyra tilted her head. The one he chose, she said, sweetly. And the one who will give him heirs. My stomach turned. I backed away, one step at a time, the broken cup pieces crunching under my shoes like bone. Why? I whispered, and I wasn't only asking about Lyra. I was asking about all of it, the council, the ceremony, Seraphine's silence. Lyra's eyes glittered. Ask your sleeping alpha, she said. If she ever wakes. The words hit harder than any slap. Magnus' head snapped toward her. Enough. But it was too late. The crack had already opened. The truth seeped through. Seraphine's illness wasn't just misfortune. It was a convenience. I turned and left before I could collapse. I didn't run in the halls. I walked, because pride is a stubborn thing, even in fear. I walked through candlelit corridors that suddenly looked like a tomb dressed for a wedding. Behind closed doors, I breathed in short, shaking bursts. My mind raced through every visit, every smile, every mercy offered. They weren't saving us. They were absorbing us. And if Lyra had done something to Seraphine, if my sister had been pushed into that unnatural sleep because she was the only one who could stop this, then staying meant more than humiliation. It meant surrender. It meant letting Seraphine die in a bed while I stood beside the man who benefited. I didn't sleep. I packed nothing but what I could carry on my back. A cloak, a small blade, a vial of healing salve I stole from the healer's shelves with hands that didn't feel like mine. Before dawn, I went to Seraphine's chamber. Her room smelled of herbs and candle smoke. Her face was peaceful, too peaceful, like a portrait painted to make grief easier. I knelt beside her bed and pressed my forehead to her hand. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I tried. I swear I tried." Her fingers didn't tighten around mine. Her chest rose and fell, indifferent to my apology. I stood. I left. Outside, the air was cold enough to bite. The sky was still dark, but the horizon held the faintest bruise of coming light. The world smelled like wet stone and distant pine. I ran to the cliff path where the wind was strongest. The shift came like it always did, painful and clean. Bones folding, skin tightening, the rush of feathers blooming along my arms. My vision sharpened. The world widened. In bird form, everything felt honest again: distance, danger, direction. I leapt. The wind caught me, and for one breath, I thought, freedom. Then the arrows came. Not warning shots. Not the clumsy attempts of panicked guards. These were aimed to kill. One sliced past my wing, so close I felt the air split. Another struck, deep and brutal. Fire tore through my feathers. Blood sprayed warm against cold wind. My body jerked mid-flight, the sky tipping violently sideways. Below, the keep stood quiet and innocent in the early dark, candles still glowing, drapes still red, as if nothing had happened. As if I hadn't just become prey. And in that spinning, bleeding instant, as I fought to keep the air under my wings, I understood the mistake I'd made. Magnus hadn't chased me because he didn't care. He hadn't followed because he wanted me to think I was free. Alphas don't run after what they believe already belongs to them. They release it. And then they hunt. The world became wind and pain. My wounded wing buckled, feathers shredding under the force of the air. The sky that had always held me, steady, ruthless, honest, tilted and turned traitor. Trees rose like spears. The horizon spun. I tried to correct, to angle my body the way Seraphine taught me when I was young and reckless and believed the ground was optional. But blood makes even the bravest creature heavy. I dropped through rain-misted branches. Twigs snapped. Bark tore. My vision flashed white, then black, then back again in ugly fragments. The last thing I felt before I hit was the cruel certainty that Magnus hadn't just wanted me caught. He'd wanted me broken. Impact stole the breath from my lungs. My bird form collapsed mid-roll, bones shifting back into human shape with a sickening lurch. I landed on cold earth, half in mud, half in wet leaves that clung to my skin like the forest was trying to bury me quickly. For a moment, I couldn't tell where the arrow had struck, only that something burned deep in my shoulder, and every heartbeat sent a hot pulse through my arm. Rain threaded down my face. The trees above blurred into shadow and storm. I tried to push up. My hand slipped. My body refused. A sound carried through the underbrush, soft, cautious footsteps, not the heavy stomp of a hunter. The hair on the back of my neck lifted anyway. I forced myself to roll onto my side and fumble for the small blade at my belt. I barely got my fingers around the hilt before a voice spoke from the darkness. "Don't move." It wasn't shouted. It wasn't even harsh. It was simply certain, the kind of command that didn't need threats behind it because it had never learned to doubt obedience. I froze, breathing in shallow, shaking pulls. "Who?" Quiet. A pause, then, softer without losing control. "If you shift again you'll tear the wound wider." I tried to focus. Between the trees stood a figure cloaked in black that drank the weak light around him. The rain didn't seem to touch him the way it touched everything else, like the air itself hesitated, unsure if it was allowed to cross his boundaries. He stayed just far enough away that I couldn't make out details. Just the shape. The posture. The gloved hands held low at his sides like he had nothing to prove. I lifted my blade anyway. "Magnus sent you," I rasped. The figure didn't react, not with anger, not with offense. "If he had," the voice said, "you'd already be dead." Something in my chest tightened, not relief, not trust, but the strange tension of recognizing truth when you don't want it. The figure stepped closer by one measured pace. "Put the blade down." "Or what?" My voice cracked on the words. "Or you bleed out while pretending dignity will keep you warm." I hated that he was right. I hated that my fingers were going numb around the hilt. The stranger's head tilted slightly, as if listening to something I couldn't hear, my pulse, the rain, the way my fear wanted to turn into panic. "I can help," he said. "But you will do exactly what I tell you." I should have said no. I should have snarled and crawled away, even if I died under the roots of some ancient tree. But the forest was spinning. The wound was flooding heat and cold through my body in waves. I swallowed. The blade fell from my hand into the mud with a dull, defeated sound. "Good," he said, as if I'd made a rational choice instead of surrendering to survival. He moved then, quickly, smoothly, closing the distance without making a single unnecessary noise. He knelt beside me but didn't touch me. Not even when I flinched. His gloved hand hovered near my shoulder, and I realized he was looking at the arrow. "Barbed," he murmured. "They wanted it to tear if you tried to pull it." My teeth chattered. "Who are you?" "Not your enemy." He paused, and when he spoke again his voice was quieter, almost careful. "Do not look up." I blinked, confused. "What?" "Do not look." The firmness returned, leaving no space for argument. "Keep your eyes on the ground." My breath hitched. "Why?" "Because it will ruin you." Another pause. "And I'm tired of watching people ruin themselves." A cold fear slid down my spine that had nothing to do with rain. I forced my gaze to the mud beside my cheek, to the torn leaves, to the little streams of water cutting through the soil. Something shifted near my wound. A pressure, not pain, like the air itself tightening around the arrow. I hissed. "Breathe," he ordered. The arrow came out in one controlled motion, fast enough to spare me prolonged agony, careful enough to avoid ripping the barbs through flesh. I screamed anyway, a strangled sound that disappeared into the rain. The stranger didn't flinch. Done. Warmth spread over the wound, unnatural and immediate, as if the bleeding had been compelled to stop by something older than herbs. I lay trembling, soaked and shaking, and still he didn't touch me. "Can you stand?" he asked. No, my voice came out raw. "I can't feel my arm." "You can." He sounded mildly irritated, like he'd heard my kind of despair too many times. "But you will not like it." "I'm not in the mood." "Stand," he said, and the single word wrapped around my body like a rope. I don't know if it was his tone or whatever strange force lived beneath it, but my muscles obeyed before my mind could keep protesting. I staggered upright with a gasp, knees trying to fold, shoulder screaming. My vision swam. The stranger stepped back again, keeping distance. "Follow my voice." "Where are we going?" "A place Magnus cannot enter." I should have asked how he knew Magnus. I should have demanded a name. Instead I heard, faint and distant, the echo of horns somewhere behind us, hunters calling to one another through the trees. My stomach turned to ice. "Move," the stranger said. So I did. We walked through the forest like ghosts. Sometimes the stranger was in front of me, sometimes beside me, always just out of reach of my vision if I tried to lift it too high. He guided me with words and the occasional gesture I saw only from the corner of my eye. "Left. Step over the root. Don't touch that stone. Keep your head down." The rules came with a strange urgency, like the forest itself was listening. Like if I broke them, something would notice. The rain eased into mist. The air thickened. My ears popped as though we'd climbed higher, yet the ground stayed level beneath my feet. The trees began to look wrong, trunks too smooth, branches too symmetrical, shadows falling in patterns that felt designed. Then we reached a wall. Not stone. Not wood. A shimmer in the air like heat above fire, except cold. The stranger stopped in front of it, and the pressure in my skull intensified until I tasted copper. "Close your eyes," he said. I did, because I was beyond trusting my instincts. A sound like distant glass singing. A faint rush, like stepping through a curtain of water. Then the pressure vanished. "Open," he said. I opened my eyes, and for a heartbeat I forgot to breathe. A citadel rose around us in quiet grandeur, as if the world had folded and revealed a hidden pocket of impossible architecture. Arched corridors and towering columns carved with old symbols. Stained glass windows catching a light that shouldn't exist beneath a clouded sky. The air was not rain-wet here. It was cool and fragrant, carrying the soft scent of candles and stone warmed by unseen fire. And above everything hung a sky locked in eternal dusk, neither day nor night, a bruised violet horizon that never shifted. Fountains glowed in courtyards beyond, water luminous as if lit from within. Gardens spilled with flowers too vivid to belong to any season. It was beauty shaped like temptation. I stumbled, my knees nearly giving out. The stranger's voice came from my left, still calm. "Welcome to the citadel." "Where is this?" I whispered. "Hidden." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you need." A pause. "Now, listen carefully. There are rules here." I laughed weakly. "Of course there are." "Yes." His voice sharpened. "And if you break them, you'll regret surviving the forest." My throat tightened. "What rules?" First, you will not see my face. I turned my head instinctively, and his voice snapped like a whip. Avellini. My name on his tongue stopped me cold. I hadn't told him. He continued as if my fear was irrelevant. Second, you will not touch the outer gates. Third, if you are offered food, you may eat it for comfort, but you will not mistake comfort for sustenance. I blinked. What does that mean? It means the citadel can soothe you, he said, almost gently now. It cannot keep you alive. The shock made my skin prickle. Then why bring me here? Because it is the only place I can keep you breathing long enough to choose what comes next. My shoulder throbbed. The bleeding had stopped, but the pain remained, duller now, pulsing beneath the skin like a warning. I swallowed. Who are you? A breath. A hesitation that felt practiced. Lucien, he said at last. The name didn't belong to a warrior. It belonged to a myth whispered by terrified children and lonely women. A name too old, too elegant for the way he moved like a blade. And why can't I see your face? I asked, quieter. Lucien's pause stretched long enough that I could hear the fountains singing in the distance. Because my curse is not gentle, he said. And neither are the people who fall into it. My mouth went dry. What curse? If you look at me, he said, voice low, you will love me. The words landed wrong. Too simple. Too absurd. I let out a breath that might have been disbelief. That's not romantic, Lucien finished. Not flattering. Not a gift. I held still, suddenly aware of how alone we were in this impossible place. What happens? You become obsessed, he said, and his calm on that word made it far more terrifying than any threat. You stop sleeping. You stop eating. You stop being a person. You become hunger shaped like devotion. My skin crawled. And if you don't return it? I asked, voice thin. Lucien's silence answered louder than words. People die, I whispered. Yes. I looked away toward the courtyard, toward the glowing fountains, the gardens too perfect, the dusk sky that never shifted. How many? I asked. Lucien didn't answer. Which was answer enough. The first days blurred into pain and strange quiet. Lucien gave me a room with a bed so soft it felt like sinking into warm water. Candles lit themselves when dusk deepened, though dusk never ended. Fresh cloth appeared when I needed bandages. Warm water filled a basin without any servant carrying it in. Magic, I realized. Not the wild kind my skyshifter blood answered to, but something woven and deliberate. I ate the food that appeared because my body begged for it. Fruit that tasted like summer. Bread that cracked warm beneath my fingers. Stew spiced with herbs I couldn't name. But no matter how sweet it was on my tongue, hunger still gnawed at my belly afterward, stubborn and unrelieved. Comfort, not sustenance. The citadel didn't feed you. It only distracted you from starving. Lucien checked my wound each day from a careful distance, instructing me how to clean it, how to wrap it, how to keep infection from setting in. He never touched me. Not even when I swayed on my feet. He spoke to me like an equal, which was its own kind of shock after Magnus. When I flinched at sudden sounds, he didn't mock me. When I asked questions, he didn't dismiss them. He answered what he could, and when he wouldn't, he said so plainly. No, he would say. Or, not yet. Not once did he ask me what I owed him. That alone felt like learning a new language. Sometimes he sat in the corner of my room, half in shadow, and spoke about nothing, weather, old stories, the habits of the world outside these walls. Sometimes we sat in silence and listened to fountains and distant thunder that never reached us. The silence with him wasn't weaponized. It didn't feel like punishment. It felt like space. And in that space, something in me began to loosen. I started sleeping again, though nightmares still clawed at the edges. I began to walk the corridors, testing my strength. I found a courtyard where the light made the water glow like pale fire, and I sat beside it with my bare feet on stone, breathing until my hands stopped shaking. Lucien watched from a distance, always out of my direct line of sight. "You hover like a ghost," I said one evening, too tired to be polite. "I am not hovering," he replied. "I am guarding." "From what?" "The walls?" A pause. "From you making the mistake everyone makes." "What mistake?" "Believing safety means the danger is gone." The words should have frightened me more than they did. Instead, they felt like honesty. And after a lifetime of careful lies, honesty was intoxicating. Outside the citadel, the world didn't pause for my healing. I learned that when Lucien showed me a mirror one night, an old oval glass framed in silver that sat on a pedestal in the hall. "This will not always work," he warned, voice clipped. "But tonight the veil is thin." On the glass, images shimmered like ripples on water, then sharpened into the great hall of my keep. Torches burned. Elders stood in a semicircle like judges. Magnus stood at the center, dressed in ceremonial black, his expression carved into grief so believable I almost hated myself for doubting it. Lyra was at his side, hands folded over her abdomen like a saintly statue, eyes downcast. When she looked up, her gaze was wet with practiced sorrow. Elder Marrow's voice carried through the mirror, distorted but clear enough. "Avellini fled," he said. "And Seraphine still sleeps." A murmur of unrest. Magnus raised a hand. The hall quieted instantly. "She was overwhelmed," he said smoothly. "Her sister's sickness, the burden of leadership, fear makes people do desperate things." He turned his gaze toward the gathered warriors. "And we must consider what her desperation drove her to do." Ice slid through my veins. He wasn't just blaming me for leaving. He was building a noose. Lyra stepped forward, voice trembling in perfect, poisoned sincerity. "I found traces," she said. "In Seraphine's chambers. Avellini had access. She was the one who brought her teas. She was the one who wanted to avoid this mating." Gasps. Angry whispers. My stomach clenched so hard I thought I'd be sick. Magnus' expression tightened, just enough to suggest pain. "I did not want to believe it," he said. "But we cannot ignore evidence. We cannot let betrayal rot this pack from the inside." Betrayal. He spoke the word like it belonged to me. The warriors' faces hardened in the mirror. People I'd grown up with. People I'd trained beside. People who had watched me bring Seraphine blankets and hold her hand and whisper apologies into the quiet. They listened anyway. Because Magnus was an alpha. Because authority is easier than truth. Because it was simpler to hate me than admit they delivered me to a cage. I stepped back from the mirror, shaking. "He's turning them against me." Lucien's voice came from behind, low. "Yes." "And Lyra," my throat tightened. "She's lying." Lucian was silent. I turned sharply. You knew. I suspected, he said. Before you arrived, I heard rumors of a sleeping alpha and a political bond arranged too quickly. That kind of convenience rarely comes without a hand pushing it. My hands curled into fists. She did it. Lucian didn't argue. He didn't soothe. He simply said, most likely. The mirror flickered again, showing Seraphine's chamber. My sister lay unmoving, skin pale, lips parted just slightly. A healer dabbed her forehead with a cloth. And beside the bed stood Lyra, watching like a predator admiring its work. A sound escaped me, half sob, half snarl. Lucian's voice cut through my rising panic. Avellini. I clenched my jaw. Don't. You cannot burn yourself alive in grief, he said, steady and infuriatingly calm. Not if you intend to do anything about it. My breath shook. What if it's too late? What if she never wakes? Lucian's pause held something like regret. Then Magnus wins. That was the truth I couldn't afford to sit with. Because if Magnus won, he didn't just take my pack. He took the story. He took Seraphine's legacy and rewrote it until she was just a tragic footnote in his conquest. And he made me the villain so no one would remember I ever fought back. The next morning, I found Lucian in one of the long halls where torn banners hung like old wounds and stained glass threw fractured light across the stone floor. I need to leave, I said. Lucian didn't move. You are not healed. I'm alive, I snapped. That's more than I was when you found me. And you will not remain alive long outside, he said. I swallowed the anger rising in my throat. My sister is dying. His silence pressed against me. You said you brought me here so I could choose what comes next, I said, voice shaking. This is my choice. Lucian's voice softened by a fraction. You think you can walk back into a pack that believes you poisoned their alpha and simply explain? No, I admitted. But I can find proof. I can get Seraphine out of Lyra's reach. My words faltered. I can try. Lucian stepped closer, still keeping his face hidden, still respecting the distance like it mattered. And if you fail? I forced my shoulders back despite the ache. Then I fail trying to save her, not hiding while she dies. For a moment, I thought he might refuse. Lock the gates. Use whatever magic lived in these walls to keep me inside like a bird in a gilded cage. But Lucian did not command me. He studied me in the quiet, and in that silence I realized something that made my chest ache. He was not used to people choosing anything but obsession around him. He was not used to being asked to let someone go. You are learning autonomy, he said at last. And that is dangerous. Everything is dangerous, I replied bitterly. No, Lucian said. This is different. I stared. What do you mean? Lucian's voice dropped, the calm sharpening into something colder. Magnus was not meant to chase you yet. He was meant to wait until you crawled back. Until fear convinced you obedience was safer than exile. My blood chilled. He doesn't wait anymore, Lucian continued. Because you embarrassed him. You didn't just flee, Lucian said. You rejected him. In front of the world that matters to him. My stomach twisted as the memory flashed, Magnus turning toward me, annoyed, not guilty. The casual entitlement. The certainty that I would endure. I whispered, so he's hunting me because I hurt his pride. Lucien's voice turned razor thin. He is hunting you because you reminded him he is not a god. A cold dread settled into my bones. How close is he? Lucien didn't answer immediately. He turned toward the corridor leading to the outer gates, the ones I hadn't been allowed to touch. The air seemed to tighten. I can feel the veil straining, he said quietly. Like a hand clawing at a locked door. I stared at him. He found the trail. Yes. My heart slammed against my ribs. How? Lucien's gaze, hidden, but I felt it, dropped to my shoulder. Blood, he said. Feathers. Arrowheads. A man like Magnus doesn't hunt by instinct alone. He uses whatever he can buy, steal, or threaten from witches and trackers. I imagined Magnus in the rain, staring at the broken shaft, at a smear of my blood, and smiling, not with desire, but with possession. Fixated, I whispered, tasting the word like poison. Lucien's voice went softer, but not kinder. Obsession is not love, Avellini. It is hunger wearing a crown. A tremor ran through me. Then I have to leave before he breaks through. You think leaving will protect this place, Lucien said. I hesitated. Won't it? Lucien let out something that might have been a breath, an almost laugh without humor. Magnus will not stop at the Citadel. He will not stop at your pack. He will not stop at you. He stepped closer, just enough that I could feel the cold in the air around him, the unnatural stillness. When a man like that loses control, he doesn't seek compromise. He seeks proof that control is still possible. My throat tightened. So what do I do? Lucien was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, it was almost gentle. You choose the price you are willing to pay, he said. Before he chooses it for you. My chest ached at the steadiness in his voice, at the absence of demand. Lucien, dangerous as his curse might be, had never once tried to claim me. He had offered shelter, truth, space. And somehow, in that space, something tender had grown. Not the feverish devotion he warned about. Something slower. Something that felt like choice. I swallowed hard. I'm leaving, I said, forcing the words past the knot in my throat. I'm going to save Seraphine. Lucien didn't stop me. But his voice followed me like a shadow as I turned toward the corridor that would lead out of this false dusk and back into the brutal honesty of the world. Avellini, he said. I looked back, careful to keep my gaze low, to respect the rule that might ruin me. Yes? Lucien's voice was very quiet, too quiet for comfort. Obsession always demands a price, he said. And Magnus is close enough now that you're going to start paying for it. Lucien's warning followed me out of the Citadel like a hand at my back. Obsession always demands a price. The veil parted with that same cold, singing pressure, and the real world rushed in, wet air, sharp pine, the honest stink of mud and fear. The dusk behind me remained perfect and still. The forest ahead was not. I didn't look back. Not because I wasn't tempted. Because I knew if I hesitated, I'd start bargaining with myself again. I'd start calling hiding wisdom and fear patience. And Seraphine would remain in that bed while Lyra smiled beside her. So I ran. I kept low through the trees until the keep's outer ridges rose out of the mist, stone and torchlight and the faint shape of banners that now belonged, at least in the eyes of the pack, to Magnus. My shoulder still ached. My strength wasn't fully mine yet. But my body remembered the sky. Near the cliff path, where the wind cut clean, I shifted. Feathers burst along my arms. My bones lightened, reshaped. The world widened until every torch was a star and every shadow a hiding place. In bird form, I became what I had always been before duty tried to pin me down. I flew in a hard circle over the keep. It looked like a wedding had never happened. Like Seraphine's coma was a sad inconvenience they'd dressed with ribbons. The hall windows glowed. Guards patrolled in tight formation. Magnus had tightened the grip. And inside those walls, my sister was still sleeping. I dropped toward the roofline, landing on a stone ledge slick with rain. Below, a narrow balcony sat unguarded, Seraphine's old balcony. The place she used to stand and let the wind tear through her hair while the pack watched her like she was the answer to everything. I shifted back into human skin, gasping as cold air hit raw nerves, and slid through an upper window I'd climbed through 100 times as a child. The keep smelled the same, smoke, wax, wet stone, but something sour threaded through it now. Fear disguised as loyalty. Control disguised as safety. I moved fast, silent, keeping to servant corridors and forgotten stairwells, places the elders never walked and warriors never bothered to guard. As I passed a side hall, voices carried. She fled because she was guilty. Magnus saved us. Seraphine would have wanted. I didn't stop to listen. Truth is fragile. It doesn't survive in rooms full of people who benefit from lies. Seraphine's chamber was guarded now. 2 warriors stood outside the door, men I recognized. Oren and Tavis. Both had trained under Seraphine's command. Both had once looked at me like a sister, even if the world didn't. Their stances were stiff. Their eyes were hollow. I stayed in the shadows and listened to their breathing. Oren was tired. Tavis was angry. Anger is easier to predict. I drew a pebble from my pocket and tossed it down the opposite corridor. It clinked against stone. Tavis's head snapped toward the sound. Check it, Oren muttered. Tavis left with a curse under his breath. When Oren shifted his weight, I slipped behind him, pressed my hand over his mouth, and put the blade to his throat, not cutting, just reminding him I could. His eyes widened in shock more than fear. Avellini, he breathed against my palm. Don't, I whispered. If you shout, I cut. If you move, I cut. I don't want to. But I will. His throat bobbed. His gaze flicked down the corridor where Tavis had gone, then back to me. You poisoned her, he said hoarsely, and the hurt in his voice was worse than an accusation. My chest tightened. If you believe that, I murmured, then you never knew me. He hesitated. That hesitation was all I needed. I slid past him and into the chamber, shutting the door softly behind me. Seraphine lay exactly as she had the last time I'd seen her, too still, too pale, like the keep was trying to turn her into an artifact of grief. The air was thick with herbs. A bowl of tea sat on the table beside her bed. And beside that bowl, a familiar silver vial. My pulse stuttered. Lyra's work was never far from her. I crossed the room in 3 silent steps and lifted the vial. The scent hit me immediately, sweet at first, then bitter underneath. Like honey poured over rot. I'd smelled that bitterness once before, years ago, when a hawk had bitten into a poisoned mouse and convulsed in the grass. My fingers shook as I uncorked it, then forced myself to stop shaking. Panic made mistakes. Seraphine had always taught me that. I dipped the tip of my blade into the liquid. The metal darkened, almost imperceptibly, like the poison recognized iron as an enemy. A sound came from the doorway. I turned. Lyra stood there, a tray in her hands, dressed in soft gray like she was mourning. Her eyes swept the room and locked on the vial in my fingers. For a heartbeat, her expression froze. Then she smiled. "Well," she said softly. "The little bird found her way home." My grip tightened. "What did you do to her?" Lyra stepped closer, unafraid. "What I had to. To clear the path," I spat. "To keep the pack alive," she corrected, and the lie rolled off her tongue like it had been practiced in front of a mirror. Seraphine was too strong. Too stubborn. She would have resisted Magnus' protection. "Protection," I echoed, bitter. Lyra's gaze sharpened. "Don't pretend you didn't understand the stakes. Our borders were failing. Our allies were circling. Magnus offered stability. He offered ownership. He offered survival," Lyra snapped, the first crack in her composure. Then she smoothed again, voice turning honeyed. "And you ruined it by running." I lifted the vial higher. "This is why she won't wake." Lyra's eyes flicked to Seraphine's sleeping face, no remorse, only irritation. "You can't prove anything." I could, but I didn't say how. Instead I said, "You're pregnant." Lyra's hand moved unconsciously to her abdomen. "And still you did this," I whispered. "You want a child raised on a foundation of poison and lies?" Lyra's smile thinned. "I want a child raised under a powerful alpha." I stared at her and realized something cold and final. Lyra didn't love Magnus. She loved what he represented, authority she could ride like a wave. I turned toward Seraphine, toward the bowl of tea. "How often?" Lyra's silence answered. I clenched my jaw, forced my mind into motion. No antidote was going to appear in this room like a miracle. Not unless I made one. I moved to the hearth and tore a strip of cloth from the bed linens. I soaked it in clean water from the basin, then wrung it out and pressed it to Seraphine's lips, wiping away the residue of tea. Lyra laughed softly. "You think you can wash poison away?" "No," I said. "I think I can remove your access." Her gaze hardened. "You won't leave here." She lunged. I reacted on instinct, ducking, driving my shoulder into her ribs. Pain flared through my wound, white-hot, but I didn't let go. We stumbled into the table. The bowl of tea tipped, spilling across the floor like dark blood. Lyra hissed and grabbed for my hair. I slammed my elbow back into her stomach, not hard enough to do lasting harm, because despite everything, I wouldn't become her. Lyra gasped and fell back. The door burst open. Oren stood there, eyes wide. Behind him, Tavis returned, blade half drawn. They took in the spilled tea, Lyra crouched and snarling, the vial in my hand. "What is this?" Oren demanded, voice shaking. Lyra rose too quickly. "She attacked me." "Lie again," I said, and my voice was steadier than I felt. "And I swear I'll drag you to the hall myself and make you drink the rest." Tavis's eyes flicked to the vial. "Avellini." "Smell it," I said. "If you've ever hunted, you know that scent. Bitter under sweet. Predatory." Oren stepped forward, torn between loyalty and the memory of Seraphine's strength. His jaw clenched. He reached out, took the vial with a careful hand, and uncorked it. He inhaled. His face changed. Slowly. Horribly. "Lyra," he whispered. Lyra's eyes flashed. "You don't understand." "I understand enough," Oren said, voice cracking. "You did this to her." Tavis's blade rose fully now, but not toward me. Toward Lyra. In the bed, Seraphine's fingers twitched. The movement was small. Easy to miss. But I saw it. My breath caught. I rushed to her side, grabbed her hand. "Seraphine," I whispered fiercely. "Come back. Come back to me." Her lashes fluttered. Then her eyes opened. They were unfocused at first, glassy with sleep that wasn't natural. Her breath hitched like she'd been dragged up from deep water. "Avellini," she rasped, voice barely there. Relief hit me so hard I almost folded. I leaned over her, forehead touching her knuckles like a prayer. "I'm here," I whispered. "I'm here." Seraphine's gaze slid past me, to Lyra, to the spilled tea, to the vial in Oren's hand. Her eyes sharpened. Even weak, Seraphine was still a storm. "Get her out," Seraphine said, voice low and deadly. Oren moved first, seizing Lyra's arm. Tavis followed, blade ready. Lyra thrashed, spitting fury. "This pack will fall without Magnus," she screamed. "You'll regret." Seraphine's eyes never left her. "And we'll fall with our own choices," she whispered. "Not yours." Lyra was dragged out. Silence rushed in behind her. Seraphine's grip tightened around my hand, surprising strength returning like the first spark of a fire. "Magnus," she said. "Where is he?" My throat tightened. "Everywhere." Seraphine closed her eyes briefly, as if the weight of it settled into place. Then she opened them again, and the old authority was there, wounded, yes, but unbroken. "Call the hall," she ordered. "Now." Truth spreads differently than lies. Lies are carried in whispers, in sideways glances, in shame. Truth is a shout. Within the hour, the keep was awake with it. Warriors gathered, tense and uncertain, as Seraphine, pale but standing, appeared before them supported by Oren and Tavis. Gasps rippled through the hall. People dropped to their knees out of instinct. Magnus arrived last, like a king late to his own court, calm and composed as if nothing had shifted. Until he saw Seraphine. His control cracked for a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to taste it. Seraphine lifted her chin. "You made plans with my silence," she said. Magnus' smile returned, too smooth. "I'm relieved you've recovered." Lyra wasn't at his side now. That absence spoke loudly. Seraphine held up the vial. "Your warrior poisoned me." Magnus' gaze flicked to it, then to me. His eyes tightened, not with guilt, but with fury that I still breathed. "I know what you'll say," Seraphine continued, voice rising. "You'll claim ignorance. You'll call it a rogue act. You'll offer grief and apologies." Magnus' jaw flexed. Seraphine stepped forward, unsteady, but unwavering. "But your greatest mistake," she said softly, "was believing I would stay asleep long enough for you to rewrite my pack." A murmur swelled into anger. Warriors shifted. Elders looked sick. Magnus' voice cut through, sharp and commanding. "Enough." The hall quieted automatically, the old instinct to obey an alpha with power. Seraphine's gaze didn't waver. "No," she said. That single word fractured something in the air. Magnus' eyes locked on me like a blade. "Avellini," he said, voice low. "Come here." The claim threaded through his tone, an old chain he expected to tighten at command. I didn't move. Seraphine's hand lifted slightly, as if shielding me. "She is not yours." Magnus' smile vanished. In its place was something raw and ugly. "She ran," he said, and the word "ran" dripped contempt. "She humiliated me." She survived you," Seraphine corrected, calm as frost. The hall shifted again. Survival was an argument no one could dismiss without admitting they were complicit. Magnus' gaze sharpened. "This changes nothing," he said softly. "Your pack is still vulnerable." "It changes everything," Seraphine said. "Because now they see you." Magnus' nostrils flared. For a moment, the predator slipped fully into view. Then he smiled again, slow and terrifying. "Fine," he said. "Keep your territory. Keep your pride. I'll take what I came for." His eyes fixed on me. My stomach dropped. Magnus turned and walked out of the hall like a man who had already decided how this would end. And that was when I knew. His plan had shifted. It wasn't politics anymore. It was personal. He came for the Citadel that night. Not with ceremony. Not with negotiation. With force. I wasn't there when he broke into the forest's edge. Seraphine had refused to let me leave again, not without support. But I felt it anyway, like a storm on the horizon. And Lucien had been right. The veil strained. When I finally slipped away, because I couldn't stay behind walls while Lucien faced Magnus alone, the air outside the keep tasted of metal and rain, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. By the time I reached the place where the veil shimmered, the magic was already trembling like a wounded animal. I stepped through, and the citadel was no longer quiet. Shouts echoed through its corridors. The fountains flickered. Candlelight trembled violently. The dusk sky overhead pulsed like a bruise being pressed. Magnus' warriors spilled into the courtyard, their boots too loud, their presence wrong against the citadel's eerie grace. Symbols burned on their wrists, dark marks that pulsed faintly, a witch's protection. Magnus stood at the center, cloak soaked, eyes bright with fevered purpose. He looked up as if he could smell me. "Avellini," he called, voice carrying with unnatural ease. "Come out." I stayed hidden behind a column, heart hammering. Then Lucien stepped into view. He moved like night given shape, calm, controlled, not hurried despite the chaos around him. He stood between Magnus and the inner halls as if he was the final door. Magnus laughed. "There you are," he said, almost delighted. "The Phantom King." Lucien said nothing. Magnus lifted a hand, revealing a dark talisman bound in iron and bone. "I came prepared," he said. "Your tricks won't touch me." Lucien's voice was quiet, steady. "It isn't a trick." Magnus' smile sharpened. "Show me." Lucien didn't move. Magnus took a step forward anyway, talisman blazing faintly. "I'm immune," he said, and his eyes glittered. "Witches promised me." Lucien's head tilted, almost sad. "Promises don't stop curses." Magnus' face twisted. "Then let me see it." The air tightened. Lucien's hand lifted, slowly, and for the first time I saw hesitation in him. Not fear for himself. Fear of what his curse did to people. But Magnus was already lunging, grabbing for Lucien's head like a man reaching for proof of victory. Lucien caught his wrist. The contact was brief, barely a touch, but it stopped Magnus dead. Not because Lucien was stronger. Because Lucien was older. Magnus snarled and ripped free, yanking the hood back. Light hit Lucien's face. The citadel went silent. For a heartbeat, I expected Magnus to laugh. To sneer. To declare victory over some ordinary, cursed man. Instead, Magnus froze like an arrow had pinned him to the earth. His mouth parted. His eyes widened, not in triumph, but in sudden, ruined awe. I felt the curse ignite in the air like lightning seeking ground. Magnus' talisman flared, then sputtered like a dying ember. No, Magnus whispered. Lucien's eyes, dark, weary, held him without warmth. Magnus took a step forward, trembling, and the change in him was terrifying. The Alpha's authority collapsed, replaced by something frantic and starving. Lucien, he breathed, voice breaking on the name like it was prayer. Please. Lucien didn't answer. Magnus reached for him again, hand shaking, desperate. Don't, Lucien said softly. But obsession doesn't listen. Magnus dropped to his knees. The man who had ordered hunts, who had bought poisons, who had smiled through betrayal like it was his right, collapsed on stone, eyes bright with need so intense it looked like pain. Avellini, Magnus whispered, not looking at me, not even remembering me for a moment. Make him. The words strangled in his throat as the curse tightened around him. Lucien stepped back, pulling his hood up again with a controlled, practiced motion. It was too late. The damage was done. Magnus remained on the floor, shaking as if his own body had turned against him. And in that moment, I understood the true cruelty of Lucien's curse. It didn't punish the people who deserved love. It punished the people who confused hunger with it. Lucien's gaze flicked toward my hiding place, brief, warning. Go. So I moved. Not toward Magnus. Toward Lucien. I stepped into the open, heart pounding, and the moment Magnus saw me, recognition flickered through his ruined expression, then twisted into something worse. If obsession was a crown, it had shifted heads. He wanted Lucien now. But he still hated me for escaping. His eyes burned, wet and wild. You, he hissed, voice shaking. You brought me here. I stared at him, this broken thing, and felt no triumph. Only exhaustion. Warriors surged forward, grabbing Magnus as he fought like a man drowning, clawing toward Lucien with desperate hands. Lucien's voice cut through the chaos, calm as ever. Take him out. The citadel's magic shuddered again, as if it didn't like this many lies inside it. Magnus was dragged away screaming Lucien's name like it was salvation. And then it was over. The aftermath didn't feel like victory. Seraphine reclaimed the keep. The elders groveled. Warriors apologized with lowered eyes and trembling hands, because guilt is easier when the danger is gone. Lyra was imprisoned. The vial became proof passed from hand to hand until no one could pretend ignorance anymore. Magnus, once untouchable, was locked in an iron room under heavy guard, not because they feared his power now, but because his obsession made him unpredictable. He raged. He wept. He begged. He tried to bargain love like it was land. And Lucien? Lucien returned to the citadel. Alone. He didn't ask me to come with him. He didn't demand my loyalty. He didn't claim a reward for saving my life. He simply vanished behind the veil, as if the dusk and the fountains were all he had ever been allowed to keep. And the absence he left behind in me was sharper than any arrow. Days passed. Then weeks. Seraphine grew stronger, but her anger remained, a slow-burning fury at the way our pack had bent. She rebuilt with ruthless focus, setting new laws, breaking old complacencies. I helped where I could, but every time I stood in the hall and heard the word duty, my throat tightened. Because duty had almost killed me. Because duty had been used as a leash. And because the only place I'd ever felt truly free, truly unclaimed, had been a cursed citadel with a man I wasn't allowed to look at. One night, unable to sleep, I slipped out beyond the borders and found the demon-bound mage. He wasn't a demon himself. He was worse, human, hungry, and clever enough to make bargains feel like destiny. He waited in a ruined chapel where the roof had collapsed and the moon poured in like pale water. Candles lined the stones in a circle, their flames blue at the tips. "You want a path," he murmured, eyes glittering. "Back to what you lost." "I want to find him," I said, voice tight. "I want to reach the citadel again." The mage smiled. "That's not the same thing." I swallowed. "Then give me what I'm asking for." He tilted his head. "A wish requires payment." I knew that. I knew it the way I knew the sky could drop you if you trusted it blindly. "What's the price?" I asked anyway. His smile deepened. "The sanctuary." My stomach clenched. "What?" "The citadel is woven from old magic," he said softly. "A pocket of illusion and dusk. A miracle held together by a curse. You want passage? Fine. But you don't get to keep miracles. Miracles are borrowed." I tasted iron. "If I pay that, it will collapse." "Yes." "And Lucien?" "He'll live," the mage said, waving a hand as if life was a small thing. "But he will lose the only place that hides him." My breath shook. Lucien had warned me. Obsession always demands a price. And here it was, fate asking what I was willing to destroy to reach what I wanted. I thought of Lucien's voice in the quiet. His refusal to touch. The way he'd given me space like it was sacred. The way I'd begun to feel like a person again inside those walls. I thought of Magnus' obsession, how it reduced a powerful man to a starving thing. And I thought of myself, standing at the edge of my own choices. If I left Lucien alone in the citadel forever, he would remain safe. But safety without freedom was still a cage. I closed my eyes. "I accept," I whispered. The mage's candles flared. Blue light surged up like a wave. And somewhere far away, I felt the citadel's magic scream. When I reached the veil, it was already unraveling. The shimmer was ragged, torn at the edges like cloth ripped by claws. The pressure in my skull was unbearable as I stepped through. Inside, the citadel was dying. Stone cracked along the columns. Stained glass shattered in slow, glittering rain. The fountains sputtered, their glowing water turning dull and gray. The dusk sky overhead tore open in jagged seams of light, as if the world beyond was trying to reclaim what had been stolen. Lucien stood in the central hall, cloak billowing in a wind that shouldn't exist here. Debris floated around him in brief, weightless spirals before slamming down. He turned at the sound of my footsteps. "Avellini," he said, and for the first time his voice wasn't calm. It was raw. I ran to him, dodging falling stone, heart pounding. "I'm sorry," I gasped. "I didn't know how else." "You made a wish," he said, and there was no accusation, only weary recognition. "I couldn't," my throat closed. "I couldn't leave you here." Lucien stepped closer, still keeping his hood low. "You should have." "No," I whispered fiercely. "You saved me. You gave me space. You didn't claim me. And my voice broke. I chose you." The hall groaned. A column split with a thunderous crack. The floor shuddered beneath our feet. Lucien's head dipped as if the weight of my words pressed into him. "Avellini," he said softly, "if you see me." "I know," I said, breath shaking. "I know what happens." He shook his head once, almost pained. "You don't." I stepped closer anyway, until I was within arm's reach, close enough to feel the cold radiating off him, close enough to see the edge of his gloved hand trembling slightly. "I'm not afraid of love," I whispered. "I'm afraid of cages." The citadel shook again, walls splintering, illusion collapsing into dust and light. Lucien's hand lifted, hovering near my cheek, not touching. Always not touching. "Then choose," he said, voice breaking on the word. "Choose now. Illusion or reality?" I swallowed, heart hammering. Then I reached up and pulled his hood back. I looked. Lucien's face was pale in the fractured light, sharp-boned and impossibly beautiful in a way that felt ancient rather than pretty. His eyes held a sadness so deep it looked like it had carved him hollow over centuries. For a heartbeat, I waited for the curse to take me, to burn out my mind and replace it with hunger. But nothing broke. Nothing twisted. What I felt was steady. Clear. Painful in its honesty. Not obsession. Love. Lucien stared at me as if he couldn't comprehend what he was seeing. "No," he whispered. "That's not." "It is," I said, voice shaking with relief. "It's real." His breath hitched. The air around us shifted, as if the curse, starved of its usual feast, had nowhere to anchor. Outside, the citadel's dusk sky tore fully open, revealing the raw, bright world beyond. Lucien's hand finally touched my cheek, trembling. "How?" "Because you never tried to own me," I whispered. "You let me choose." The citadel began to fall in earnest, stone collapsing, light swallowing archways, gardens dissolving into mist as if they'd never existed. Lucien's fingers tightened around mine. "Then we go," he said, voice steady again, but different now, lighter, as if something had finally loosened inside him. We ran. Not as prey. Not as captor and captive. As two people leaving a collapsing illusion behind. We crossed the hall as the stained glass window exploded in a cascade of color. We sprinted through a corridor as the floor cracked and vanished into bright emptiness behind us. At the veil, now a tearing wound of light, Lucien pulled me close. "Hold on," he said. I whispered. And then we stepped through. The citadel screamed once, one final, beautiful note, then vanished. The forest was still there. Wet leaves. Cold air. Honest wind. No eternal dusk. No enchanted fountains. No sanctuary built on illusion. Just the world. Lucien stood beside me, cloak dark against the gray sky, face uncovered, eyes quiet. In the distance, the keep's torches glowed faintly. Seraphine would rule again. Magnus would rot in his own obsession. Lyra's poison would become a lesson written in law and blood. And me? I looked at Lucien, really looked, without fear, without hunger. He took my hand, not to claim me, but to offer presence. I squeezed back. I don't belong to them anymore, I whispered, thinking of the hall, the elders, the word duty used like chains. Lucien's thumb brushed my knuckles. Then where do you belong? I breathed in the cold air. The sky above was vast, unpromising, and free. With myself, I said softly. Then I turned toward him. And with you, if you'll have me. Without magic. Without illusion. Without claims. Lucien's eyes softened, something like wonder flickering through the sadness. That's the only way I ever wanted. So we walked. Not toward certainty. Not toward safety. Toward a future that was finally ours to choose. No magic. No chains. No claim. If this story caught your attention, subscribe and join us for the next chapter.